Welcome to the fourth episode of Drams and Dragons, the podcast about the fantasy genre and whiskey and probably a few other things along the way. My name is Gus Berger, and with me, as always, is my co host, Dustin Van Horn. How are you, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, Gus. Excited to see you be on the cast. Four episodes. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Four.
four.
Well, tonight we are going to be doing something a little different. We're not going to be talking about a specific book or novel or series. Instead, we decided we wanted to talk about adaptations. So, sort of a more general topic, and adaptations like books that have been turned into movies, TV shows, video games. And I think that it's a really interesting topic. There's a lot to get into. We could probably do a whole series on just adaptations, just TV shows and movies that have been made out of fantasy books. First, before we do that, as always, we're going to have a little drink. I think tonight it actually might just be me doing a little bit of drinking. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that I got the good old H2O here tonight. We record. I'm on the East Coast and Gus is not, so it's a little later for me.
Yeah, there's a few hours difference and maybe you're a little under the weather and got a lot of stuff going on. So I am
Yeah.
still going to do a little tasting. I chose what I chose because I was looking for something that's a little bit of something that's been adapted, something that's been sort of had a twist put on it.
Right,
So
right.
what I'm having tonight is the Glenfiddich 12 single malt, but it's the one that's been finished in Amontillado sherry casks. It is a very nice amber color. I know for a fact that they add color to the Glenfiddich. And it's chill filtered and all of those things, right? It's a mass market scotch. It has the kind of that perfect scotchy color, you know?
But they nailed it with the
They
coloring.
nailed it with the artificial coloring for sure. It has a very interesting, sort of nice smell. I do pick up some sherry notes. It smells a lot like Glenfiddich 12 to me in certain ways. Like it's sort of got that slightly appley, malty, Speyside Scotch smell. It's very much a classic Scotch. The difference is with this, I pick up some sort of dried fruit notes, almost like raisins or dried dates or something like that, where it's sort of this rich, dried fruit note, almost candied fruit. Yeah, and I kind of taste the same thing on the palate. It's the nose and the palate agree. It very much tastes like, your average Glenfiddich 12, but with sort of a raisiny undertone. It's both a sort of faithful to its sort of core sort of experience, but it's got a little twist on it and it's good. The finish is fairly short. It's fairly warm. It's got a nice spicy quality. You can definitely, especially towards the end, I feel like is when I get more of the sherry cask from this. On the finish, I get it more than I get it on the sort of initial drink or even on the nose. But again, that dried fruit element comes through the whole way. It's a nice little drink.
No, I'm curious, Gus. So I will not be drinking this evening, but I'm curious to put you on the spot. What
Sure.
is your process when you drink? Every whiskey drinker I've talked to has kind of a different way they conceptualize the initial drink, and some people breathe a certain way. Like, do you have a process you do whenever you taste critically?
I mostly just drink it. I know that sounds
Mhm.
I don't do anything crazy because nobody drink does that. Like if I'm somebody I'm just sitting down and drinking a whiskey, I'm not gonna, you know, get air in my mouth. I'm not gonna aerate it and try to open it up, a little bit. There's kind of I find that like, yeah, it can help sort of get more flavors in, but I also find that doing things like that can sometimes increase the sort of negative stuff, the negative flavors and increase the alcohol, the way the alcohol hits and the way some of the sort of, yeah, other things like the coningers and stuff like that hit. They can be sort of less pleasant. I'd really just try to focus my brain on, trying to pick out flavors as opposed to trying to like drink it a different way or to kind of, I just sip it like I would normally sip a drink. And I know you see some people like who are doing tastings who are like they're doing all kinds of different things to try to like I don't find that to be particularly helpful personally.
Gotcha. I like that. It's a very Gus approach. It's like no nonsense. You're gonna take a sip and taste it. I like that. I did a lot of tastings when I lived in
Hmm.
Hawaii, oddly enough. There was an Irish bar that did monthly tastings. It was great. Boy, the guy would come up there and he had a whole shtick, and he says, you gotta drink it like you're munching on a cookie, like almost like you're biting into a cookie, and then you let it slow. And whenever I try it, it would go down my throat the wrong way, and I go, it would burn,
Yeah.
and I'd be like, this is
Yeah.
terrible.
Right. I'll find that like sometimes it will take me 2, 3 sips, right, to really find all the flavors. And so I'll probably take another sip here in a minute. But yeah, I don't necessarily do any crazy thing. I drink it. But it's really for me, it's more something I'm doing like, in my head, in my brain, how I'm focused and concentrating on what's going down.
Well, if I may, I am not yeah, even though I'm not drinking, I'm thinking of as I'm even drinking my water here. Something I do that I did find was helpful, and it might be something fun to try for the listeners and for us too, is finding a way to engage the soft palate can be an interesting way to eke out some flavors that you might not be getting with your tongue.
Mhm.
We all do it. I mean, just when you breathe, that's why we smell, right? And then, yeah, I found it was interesting. Like I had to kind of train myself to do it because it's not really a natural thing, really, to take that deep breath. It's almost like an extra pocket between the soft palate of your mouth and your nose. But I always found like taking a breath in after I've had a sip of whiskey, sometimes there's an extra element that'll pop out there, especially if it's like a complicated whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as tricks, I think that's really the only extra thing I do.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'd say the only other thing that I would say is that sometimes I find that letting the whiskey sort of air out or can change what you're getting, and then warming it up. I think you had mentioned that
oh yeah, the
a few
hands and
episodes
the
ago. Yeah, and then also when you swirl the glass, there's sort of alcohol and also the sort of the scent into the fragrance into the air into the glass, so that when you then smell it, you get a sort of stronger smell. That's why often why people swirl the glass. You also see the legs on the side of the glass, right? With the legs are the drink running down the side of the glass, and depending on how they look, you can sort of get a sense for the. It's not super scientific by any means, but you can get a sense for the alcohol content and how the sort of mouthfeel is and what the sort of the character, the physical sort of viscosity of the drink is. So there's some different things you can do there. The other thing is the style of glass matters very much. Some people might scoff at the different kinds of glasses or glassware changing the flavor, the fragrance sort of profile of the drink. um,
yeah.
I find that when I taste, and I've done this side by side, I've done this with the Glencairn glass, that's sort of the classic modern Scotch drinking, Scotch tasting glass. You compare that side by side with like a little snifter, like you had a little, whiskey tasting, like sized snifter that you
Yeah,
were
for the
drinking out of.
moonshine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the moonshine. And I also have some of those. I also have a couple of those that I use for some things. But the difference between those two glasses is surprising. And it's not that you're getting totally different flavors or scents. You're just getting more of them in the Glencairn, I find. And I think the shape of the glass, the result of that sort of fluted shape at the top with the sort of rounder bottom, it seems to me like you get less of the alcohol on the nose. And so you're able to pick out more of the other scents. And it's really nice. It works very well.
Agreed. And you see that with a lot of drinks too. Where you drink your coffee, what kind of
Mhm.
cup, mug you use for that. It makes a big difference. And yeah, I'd love to look more into that because it seems, we mentioned soft palate, sense of smell and taste and how they interact. That's what's so fascinating about whiskey tasting. It's amazing that just the glass shape can change your whole sensory experience.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm totally with you. And it's such a sensory experience. I mean, you got the visual with the legs.
Mhm.
That was my first warning sign, other than the smell of the moonshine last week, that let me know I wasn't probably going to enjoy my moonshine because the
Yeah.
legs. Yeah, I think I said it looked like a centipede. It was just
Yeah. Oh,
no like smooth oily look that let it know that it'd be a like a smooth creamy mouthfeel. It was
yeah.
ugh. So
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking about things changing as you drink them too. Taking another sip of this Glenfiddich 12 Amontillado cask. I get, more oak on the back end. I get more malt on the nose, and to some extent, sort of the brighter fruity notes that I got initially have kind of gone away, and I'm left with more of the sort of deep, rich, raisiny, dried notes.
Hmm,
It also, so it changes as you drink it too. Like your palate adjusts, different things pop out as you go. Never worried about trying to get every note on the first sip.
good advice. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
good training too. Yeah, you gotta love a little bit of patience, a little
Hmm.
change is good. Yeah, yeah, that's glad you're enjoying that. It sounds there's a lot of similarities to the 21 year I had. I'd be interested to try them side by side. It's the same whiskey. It's just aged.
Yes, aged a little longer. Yours was aged, and then obviously then it was put into the rum casks, right?
Yeah, yeah, the rum,
It was
that's right.
rum cask.
Yeah,
Yeah, this one's sherry. This one's Amontillado, and we could do a whole episode just on different sherry casks and like what that
yeah,
means and what
the
different
unique
types of.
flavor.
In fact, I would like to. We might do another subject like this at a later date where we talk about what the heck sherry is and what the difference between Amontillado and Pedro Jimenez and Fino and blah, blah, yeah, all the different types, are.
Yeah,
So this is actually Amontillado. The one interesting thing about this is a little different than a lot of sherry casks that are
hmm,
used for Scotch.
really?
Yeah, you can find them nowadays, especially. You can find Amontillado. The British pronounce it Amontillado, but I
Of
don't
course
take my
they do.
Spanish pronunciation advice from Brits. So the Amontillado casks are not super common. You find a lot of Oloroso, you find a lot of PX, like Pedro Jimenez casks. Sometimes you find the sweeter ones.
It looks good. I did a quick Google on it. It's the like words like unique and complete fermentation and extraordinarily complex come up. I am
Yeah.
intrigued.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
should note, I've never actually had Amontillado sherry.
Oh,
Oh, maybe we should do that next time. I don't know.
maybe we should.
Get a little
I would
bottle.
love to taste a sherry because I've only ever cooked with sherry.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I've had one or two. I've had a little bit of I've had a Pedro Jimenez before. It's very sweet. It's like cloyingly sweet. I
okay.
mean, it's like, but it's good too. It's like it's really intense. You can only have like a little bit. It's very intense. It's almost. You ever had Saturnus wine or anything like that? No.
Uh,
It's like almost sweeter than like most like tawny ports. It's like really sweet.
sounds like I would go get some fancy cheeses and pair it with
Yes,
the sherry.
absolutely. Although with a lot of them, yeah, cheese. With something like a PX, Pedro Jimenez, you would want something more like chocolate, or like you
Ooh.
could put it on ice cream. It's like super sweet.
Oh, okay.
It's like dessert sweet. You know what I
Gotcha.
mean? Anyway, on that note, let's get into our subject tonight. Since it's not a book, and we're talking adaptations. Let's just start by Dustin. Do you want to tell us, tell our listeners, what are your favorite adaptations? What worked well for you?
It's interesting. We talked about this working up to the show. There's kind of the big three that everyone
Mhm.
talks about, which we won't talk about too much tonight. But
Yeah, we can list
but
them. We can list them. The the
yeah, that's probably
the
a good place to
three.
start.
Yeah, we'll start there. So the big three that are like obvious adaptations. Everybody knows them. Everybody loves them. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones. Almost everybody loves them. I know the last couple seasons of Game of Thrones, definitely the last season sucked.
Uh,
Straight up.
yeah,
So we're gonna kind of ignore those three.
yeah,
I know that like we're talking adaptations and we're going to ignore those. Well, yeah, because everybody knows about them.
yeah. Those,
Everybody appreciates them. So we're going to move past them and we're going to get into some stuff that is a little more not unusual. Most people, a lot of people will have heard of these, I think, but they're less obvious than those three. So with those out of the way, Dustin, what do you like?
I guess, and I like that we're couching it this way because they set the bar pretty high for adaptations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the case of the last season, they set it pretty low. We know what a good one looks like. We know what a good one
Yeah,
doesn't look like. Um,
definitely.
so yeah, it's kind of complicated and always goes back down to taste and what we like. I know in general, I can appreciate that a screenplay is different than writing a book, and you have to adapt it
Mm-hmm.
somehow. You cannot recreate. And I when we were preparing for this, my book tastes run into the sci-fi realm. I go back. I actually I would say I read both equally, but I couldn't help but thinking of the original Dune movies where they tried to recreate the whispering that they have, like the Quetzalcoatl, and we must
Yeah.
tell Paul this, and it didn't work. It was weird.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, it's classic and it's fun, but yeah, a good show, a good adaptation, I think should marry the concepts of like honoring the book, honoring the source material, and tastefully expanding on it and adapting it in a way that's like accessible to people. And so, in the spirit of Dune, Dune's such a funny one because I mean, it's sci-fi as sci-fi can get, but I couldn't get Dune out of my head when talking about adaptations.
Yeah, well, let's not be bound. Let's not be bound for this, at least for this episode. If Dune is what you want to talk about, it's sci-fi. It's right, adjacent to fantasy. I mean, it's sci-fi fantasy. You can go to the bookstore, it's sci-fi
Hmm,
fantasy together, most places, right?
yeah,
I'm a huge sci-fi nerd as well. I love fantasy and sci-fi. We chose fantasy to talk about most of the time, but I mean,
yeah,
we should, last week's episode, Dungeon Crawler Carl. I mean, that's come on, that's like half sci-fi book. Like we already tried it. We already like it.
yeah. I appreciate your openness. Yeah, we want to be friendly to all the sci-fi people too. And I think the concept is the same though, and I think it also illustrates an issue I've had with fantasy adaptations. I don't enjoy a lot of them. Most fantasy adaptations I've seen, there's something about them that kind of niggles at me and makes it hard to enjoy. And I know you have a nice list here, so you'll probably prove me wrong at some point. I'm interested to hear yours, but Dune, Dune's been on my brain. I saw it in IMAX a couple weeks ago.
Same.
I wish we had lived closer together because we would have been there.
Yeah.
Because for those of you who don't know, so Gus and I live near each other, and we totally would have been there for the first Dune, but it was COVID. It was
Yeah.
like high COVID time,
It's like
and
lockdown.
so we went separately, and I went to a theater, and there was maybe two other people in the theater with me, and it was actually really annoying because the two other people were eating popcorn loudly and had loud rappers and stuff, and I was like, I just do this at home.
Yeah. I
Um,
watched it at TV on the TV at home. Like I watched
ah,
it on streaming because it was like that one of those like big releases during COVID that got
mm,
like straight to streaming release.
oh, that's right.
But it was on
But
there day one. So that's where I saw it. It was
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, right. So what they did with it, and I've read Dune, and I started into the second book, which is very challenging for most people because it's
That's
it's
yeah,
woo,
it's pretty different from the
very,
first
yeah,
book. Yeah.
yeah. I would even say to most people, don't worry about it. Don't worry
Yeah,
about like
just
reading
read
the series.
just read
Yeah,
Dune.
yeah.
I'm
Dune's
surprised
great.
there's talk of a third movie because I'm
Yeah.
like, hold up, it gets weird. It's
Yes.
not like like you thought the first movie was kind of where the first book was kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Buckle
Bless
up.
their heart. Yeah. Buckle up. Part of what, so I'm a big like Wheel of Time fan. I've loved epic fantasy for a long time, and it's hard to find things that scratch that itch for like
Yeah.
a deep history and Dune is there's a lot of rich history to Dune. So I did read a lot of the backup books, like the chapter house books that they have that go through all the different
Mhm.
houses and what they do and why they do things. And so it basically to get back to why the adaptation is so amazing. It's the best example I can find of like an improvement on the book in all that the storytelling, the way they explain some of the complex, like just weird stuff that goes on in Dune, because there's weird stuff. And when you watch the movie, there was some stuff for years. It's been like rattling around in my brain after you read a book, and you're like, what's up with that? He artfully and powerfully and just succinctly explained it in a way that was
Yeah.
entertaining. If we talk about a sensuous experience, when you see Dune, the music, the foreshadowing, just the use of bass and like it's a visual and auditory treat to watch this movie. It's art.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the second one in particular,
Oh,
I thought was stunning.
yeah.
I mean, just absolute joy to watch from the sandworms to the scenes on the Harkonnen planet where it's all like black and white, and there's like because they got the black sun and all that, and then like
Mhm.
just visually and the scene. I don't want too many spoilers with the scene and the when he goes to talk to the council or whatever and declares himself
Ah, yeah.
and then the scene at the end where he's like uses the voice. Yeah, they're chills, right?
Yeah, I'm getting chills
Like,
right now. Ah,
yeah, I know. I'm same. I want to go back and see it again.
yeah.
Like the old one is sort of like this culty, almost campy thing.
Mhm.
Like the new ones are one of the best adaptations ever made, I think,
Yeah.
of a book.
It hits all these markers. Like if we're going to set a criteria for a good adaptation, all the movie stuff it hit and it nailed, and it's one of the best movies I've ever seen just on its own without being
Yeah,
adaptation.
yeah,
But then when you get into the the attention that they paid to the source material, they had to change some stuff for the screen. Every decision they made improved upon the book. And even if you've seen the second one, this is a minor spoiler. Paul Atreides is not a hero. This is not a tale about a hero who saves the galaxy. It's actually a cautionary tale about following kind of charismatic cult leaders kind of thing. And
yeah.
that end scene you were talking about, in a way that was so much more effective than the book, it shows like this guy's got a little like Darth Vader going on a little bit.
Hmm. I think the key to it is they didn't change things that they didn't have to.
Hmm. Oh, I hate when they do that. Like
They didn't
arbitrary.
change things arbitrarily. The changes that they made when they made them were faithful to the spirit of the book. Because you have to make some changes. You're right about that,
Yeah.
Dustin. You're absolutely right. You have to make some changes to the book because you've got a book that's like 150,000 words. You cannot get all of that into a 2, 3, or 4, or even 6 hours of movie, right? Like
Nope.
you are going to have to make some sacrifices. You're going to have to cut some things out. When you cut something out, you're going to have to change something elsewhere. But the key is you have to be faithful to the spirit of it and you have to not change things for no reason. And I
Hmm.
find that a lot of the time that you get these horrible adaptations, and there are so many. I compiled, a long list of bad adaptations
Yeah.
in the fantasy genre. Most of these ones, like they were not faithful to the source material and in arbitrary ways. When Game of Thrones got bad, it was because they were just making shit up.
Yep. And the characters were no longer the characters.
They weren't consistent with who the characters had been for the rest of not only in the books, but for the previous like 6 seasons of show. So suddenly these characters were just doing things because like Deus Ex Machina and like just doing shit, right?
Yes.
And they were doing what the writers thought, the showrunners thought would be exciting on the screen, as opposed to what those characters would do and what would be a good story and what would like be true to the books and true to the characters and faithful to the spirit of it. Yeah. So Dune is a great first one to bring up because it is fantastic. If you haven't seen the Dune movies, the new ones, go do it. Well, they're still out. Well, it's still in IMAX. Go see it while it's still in IMAX because that experience blew me away. And
Yeah.
I think it would have been great on a regular screen and with a regular sound system, but in an IMAX one, it was special.
Yeah, it was like something you'll remember forever.
Yeah, it was really. Yeah. So I think we should move on from Dune because there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of things that I want to talk about. And I don't know how much time we have tonight.
Yeah.
The one that I'd like to talk about is The Witcher
Oh, The Witcher.
because it goes in two directions. You have the Witcher video games and you have the Netflix show. Now, I happen to really like the Witcher books. I didn't read the Witcher books until I'd played the video game. So I played the video game first. I think this is true of a lot of people.
Yeah, same here.
This wasn't something that was on my radar as a series, as a book series, but I am a gamer. I started playing Witcher 2. Witcher 3 came out, phenomenal video game.
You were into Witcher 3.
I was really into it.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that game. I read the books because of this game. They were pretty different. They have a very Polish sort of Slavic feel to them. They have a different kind of way of telling a story. The interesting thing about the games is they're not a direct adaptation of the story. They're essentially like a sequel to the books. They're not like an authorized canon of the series. It's a total like fanfic kind of thing. But the people who made it are Polish. The game studio that made it is Polish. They understood the characters. They understood what the author was trying to do. They understood the world that he wrote because it's a very Polish Slavic mindset and a very Polish Slavic world based on Slavic like local folklore and all of that stuff. And it's fantastic. The people who made those games got it. They understood the characters. They understood the culture. They're in that culture. They're part of it. They were faithful to it, even while they made up a completely original story.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the Netflix series is one of the worst series I've ever seen in my life in
Ooh.
terms of it. Now, in terms of specifically, in terms of being faithful to the source material. It's so bad that Henry Cavill, the lead, the guy who played Geralt the Witcher, essentially left the show over it because he's a huge fan and he was as frustrated as the fans were. Now, I will say this, the first season wasn't so bad. The first season was not super faithful to the books. It made some changes, it adapted things. And
What you
then
gotta do.
season two happened, which you got to do. You got to do. I fully admit you have to adapt things. I didn't even think the first season was that bad. I thought it was entertaining. There were some very entertaining things that came out of that first season. The song, like, Dandelion
Yeah, tip your
or
Witcher kind of thing,
Yasker,
or
yeah,
the
the
yeah,
toss a coin to your Witcher.
yeah. And
Uh,
Cavill, what would you think of Cavill or Kate Cavill?
yeah, Henry
His
Cavill
his performance,
was
you know,
really played a really good Geralt.
yeah, he had the
Again,
voice down.
he had the voice down, he had the
Yeah,
look down,
yeah,
he had the sort of the sword fighting like stunt work that he was doing a lot of his own stunts. He had all of that down. Henry Cavill's great. He did a
yeah.
great job as Geralt. Some of the other casting was fine or like decent. Yaskir, the bard dandelion who follows him around, sort of his companion. He was really funny in the first season. But then as the show went on, you get season two, season three, it devolved. They got away further from the books. They made arbitrary decisions. They made decisions that made no sense in terms of the characters and the story that the books were trying to tell.
Yeah.
They made decisions that made no sense in the context of Slavic culture and
Yeah.
Slavic folklore.
There's a hubris to that, huh? Like they think they know better than the author and the people who love the book and brought it into place in the first place. They,
We talked about this. You can make changes if you're faithful to who the characters are and you're faithful to the story. You can change it to make it work on screen.
Mhm.
They didn't.
Yeah,
They made wholesale changes for the sake of making changes.
yeah,
They were not true to Slavic culture. They were not true to the author's vision.
yeah.
And they basically just ruined it.
Well, yeah, I think there's two things going on with that too, because it's like there's a respect thing that really comes into play. Like they're not respecting the sources, they're not respecting the fandom, but this goes back to Dune. Like I felt respected as a viewer when I saw Dune. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like they respected my time and my attention and my interest. When they started going off the rails with Witcher, I felt like they just saw me as a number. They actually didn't care if people really enjoyed it. There was like a focus group thing. They're like, we think focus groups are going to like seeing more shots of Henry Cavill's calves. Let's get some topless scenes with Yennefer in there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's let's get some drama going. People like drama. We got to go for this demographic. I just felt like they were completely unplugged from reality with that show and like
Yeah.
what their show was and what people wanted. And what's the emotion going on there? Like resentment, because it could have been
Yeah.
great. It could have, and if they just stuck with the story, just stick with the characters. It's like it seems like it's basic stuff, right?
And it's to me, it's a sad one because of how the games were so great. It's a great adaptation of the characters in the world. The show started off okay, and then it just season two just went off the deep end,
Yeah.
and it's very frustrating as a fan of that, as a fan of those books, as a fan of the games. That was very sad, very disappointing to see that. We can talk about one that I think both of us probably, I think most people probably like. Get onto a better note again because we talked about Dune, which everybody loves. We talked about
Look,
Witcher, which
boot on our hearts, right? Yeah.
yeah, but I think there's one adaptation is probably pretty beloved by like the world over, at least by our generation, and I actually think it's better than the book. The Princess Bride.
So good.
It's so good.
I have not. I didn't even know it was an adaptation until a few years ago. And I was like, oh, there's a book. Well, and the guy reads the book in the story, though. He's like reading the book, but you never think of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of the book too. I mean, in
Like
the book you
bookception.
get that, right? So there's a character reading a book in the book. Yeah, bookception. The book itself is odd. It has its moments. A lot of the things that are not amazing about the book were fixed by the movie. They cleaned up the narrative. They cleaned it up so it's a sort of straighter line a little bit, right? It's more of this sort of direct quest that's going on. There's less interjection. And like you didn't even know it was an adaptation. It's a classic movie, right? Beloved.
Yeah, everyone's quoting it all the time.
So that's one I think is better than the book, and not even a little bit better than the book. I think it's a
Oh,
lot
that's a
better
good
than
one.
the book.
It's an unexpected one. I like that.
Yeah, Princess Bride
It's
better
good.
than the book.
Be a good title for a re-release there. Yeah, I ran into. It's funny you mentioned that. Kind of from a similar era. When I was thinking about this show, I was thinking about all these like movies from the '80s that I saw that were just god awful adaptations. Earthsea was
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Ursula
Oh,
Ursula Gwyn's the books are so
I
good,
love her books.
classics, and
Yeah.
it's like an '80s ass terrible animation adaptation that was I couldn't watch it. I tried to watch it with my kid at one time, and she just, Daddy, I don't like this. I was like, yeah, I don't either, sweetie.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think that's a hard one to adapt. Yeah, so much of that book and those books, the Earthsea series, are made because of the sort of perspective, and you're getting a lot of. And we could do an
Yeah.
episode or whatever on the Earthsea
Mm-hmm.
series. I would love to
That'd be
do some
great.
classic
It's good stuff.
fantasy. Yeah, I think it's just sometimes it's a hard thing to adapt material that's so much from a particular perspective and a like a it includes like what somebody's feeling and thinking and experiencing them and experiencing in their own sort of inner world and their
Yeah.
own sort of inner workings, right? I think that is probably very
Yeah.
challenging to adapt. So I can see why the Earthsea stuff, and I know it's been
Mhm.
tried a couple of times in different ways, and it's just never been good,
Yeah.
even though the books are
Yeah, they're
amazing,
so
right?
yeah, I was talking to a playwright about this very subject. She writes scripts, plays, and she was saying there's a balance between showing and telling that makes a show good or bad. It said that's what a lot of like these
Yeah.
greenlit Netflix shows that are popping up and some of the '80s stuff that didn't go over well, and why they failed is that they failed to show us in a medium where you have to show people because you can't just tell them, and that's how you get like one of my pet peeves
Hmm.
is just exposition in a movie, like someone telling you about something. I'm like, this is I don't want to watch a movie just to watch some unless it's like a
Yep.
Quentin Tarantino movie and the dialogue is interesting. There's a lot of stuff from the '80s like that. Um, a lot of stuff now. It seems like there's a big market for just terrible dribble out there because I guess people will watch it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Streaming has done this interesting thing where on the one hand, a lot of novels are getting, turned into
mhm.
shows, turned into streaming shows. A
uh,
lot of,
Wheel
like
of
whether
Time.
that's Wheel of Time, that horrible Rings of Power show. It's not even based on a book. It's based on like the
I didn't even watch it,
footnotes
man. I was so excited
and,
about it. I didn't even watch it.
it was not good. It had its moments, like it did it, and it was pretty. It was gorgeous, like it was eye candy. But I did finish it, but the writing
Yeah.
was horrific. I mean, it was some of the worst writing. Like you put hundreds of millions of dollars into a show, and you can't hire a decent set of writers for it. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know if there was somebody like with their like grubby little mitts in the writing room that shouldn't have like controlling things or like trying to
Yeah.
change things that shouldn't have been, or whether they just hired horrible writers. But it was just awful. I mean, the writing was awful. As like somebody who like I read a ton, I write.
Yes.
What are you doing?
And
Like
it
it was so bad,
and it
and the
doesn't make
main
sense
problem
because
was
it
the
behooves
writing.
them to have better writers because the show will be better and then it won't tank and get discontinued. You've seen it happen so many times. I mean, every show we've mentioned that's been bad has had that happen. There's been script issues, writing issues. And again,
Yeah,
going back to Dune, which is I guess our pristine example here. Yeah, because they nailed it. You have to have a good movie. You have to have a good show first. And you can't put the cart before the horse, though.
yeah, yeah. You want good writers?
Well,
Hire
yeah,
their writer
I guess
room,
they needed the
writers room. Like
strikes, huh?
it's. I mean, there's some
Yeah,
look. Yeah, right. There are some genuinely incredible writers like and
Hmm.
adapters of material out there. If you're gonna spend, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars on a show,
Yeah.
you can afford them.
Yep.
They
Just pay them
exist. They're in
fairly.
the world.
Be
They,
ethical.
yes, right? Yes.
It's not rocket
Just
science.
pay them fairly. Don't go cheap on your writer's
Yeah. All
room.
you
It will ruin
executives
your
who are
show.
listening right now,
Yeah, all the millions of executives who are listening to our
they're out there.
show,
You,
obviously. But this is just being put out into the world, and hopefully
oh
somebody
no,
will
one
listen
day,
and
yeah,
somebody will,
we'll go
you
over it.
know.
Um, I did want to mention, I said it was hard to find fantasy adaptations. I really enjoyed Deus Das Machina, which is a weird one because for those unfamiliar, it's a role-playing campaign that was converted into I think Amazon Prime. It was a cartoon, and it was good, but it was,
Yeah, but it's them. I
yeah,
mean, they're the ones who made it, right? It's the people. So just for those who are unfamiliar, so Deus Ex Machina is a cartoon. It started out as
yeah,
what,
it's
like a
a,
YouTube show,
yeah,
right? As of this group of voice actors who were basically streaming their
hmm,
Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. And they did several of these over the years, and it got
yep,
really popular. It's still really popular. And they got signed to do one of their campaigns as like a full animated, like, TV show. And it came out, there's 2 seasons out right now, right? On Amazon Prime. Is
Did they
that right?
release
I
a
think it's
second
two
season?
seasons,
If they
right?
did, I have stuff to do tonight.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, well, there
I'll
we
see
go.
you later,
Gotta
guys.
go. Yeah. No, they did a second season. I remember the plot line of it. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there's 2 seasons of it. It's fantastic, and I don't know, like, it is an adaptation. I don't know how much of an adaptation it is, and I would say that only because
Yeah.
they did it themselves. And some of the voice actors, who are part of this group, are voice actors
Hmm.
in the show. Like, it's done by them to the point where, like, they're writing it, they're voice acting it. It's them
Well,
adapting their
Dustin,
own work,
in
right?
uh, in defense of the adaptation, though, they did have to find a way to take their campaign structure
Mm-hmm.
and winnow it down, and they had
Yeah,
to change the genre because, yeah, and then they had to hire
that's fair.
artists,
That's
and
fair.
the whoever they got to do the cartoon just did a fantastic job with
Oh yeah,
animation. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
It's a great
beautiful.
art. It is a great art style. It's a really fun show. But
Yeah,
yeah, so
and it's
that's
kind
that
of
is a
it's kind
good
of
one.
off the wall. It's not something. I think that's why it popped up in my head because it's not something we usually see, and it's kind of exciting. I enjoyed it because I actually don't enjoy watching people role play. Um, I never understood it, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's great."
I'm
I'd
with
rather
you
be
actually. I
playing,
don't enjoy that.
honestly. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
appreciated it.
same.
Yeah.
But let me say, I think there's something to that though, and I think this is something that I wanted to bring up. There are some adaptations. Some of them involve the author. They may not hire the author to just write the script, right? But they'll hire the author as a consultant, somebody that can kind of, like, maybe they'll even be a producer of some kind. I've noticed there are more adaptations than this, but one author that I know has been involved in some of his own adaptations is
Mm.
Neil Gaiman.
Oh yeah.
Love me some Neil Gaiman. Really good author. He was involved, I believe, in doing the Sandman adaptation
Which I have not seen.
for Netflix,
Yeah. Oh, okay.
which is great. Crystal, my wife, and I
Mm.
watched it when it came out. It's one of those comics, the Sandman comics, are one of those things where, like, it was, I think most people thought it could never be adapted
That was me. I,
into
I read the
film.
comics and I was surprised they adapted them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and I haven't read all of them, but I've read some of them over the years. They did it really well. Was it, again? It was an adaptation. Like, some things are changed. That's how it goes. But it was good. A couple more that he did. He helped
Mm.
do the Good Omens
Oh, it's a great. Yeah.
series for Amazon, which are great. It's Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, did the Good Omens book. And then obviously Terry Pratchett has passed away since then. And Neil Gaiman then helped adapt the series for Amazon for streaming, and it's fun. I don't think the second season was quite so great, but the first
Yes.
season was excellent.
Love seeing David Tennant back in action.
Uh,
Oh, I guess he never left, but
oh
I
yeah,
just I enjoy him.
uh,
Yeah.
he never let. Yeah, but he's yeah. It had been a little while
Yeah.
since I think I saw him in something. David
I like
Tennant's
him as a brooding bad
always
guy too.
fantastic.
It's
Um,
bad,
he's better as I think he's better
yeah.
as that sort of bad boy, like
Yeah, he's
brooding
hilarious.
kind of character, right? And he's great.
Yeah.
He's great as Crowley
And and
in that show.
mhm. Oh no,
Another. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
maybe that's the another marker of a good adaptation because in both of these examples, the Sandman with Deus Ex Machina, they they brought a genre that people might not be interested in. Um, the Sandman comics, those are graphic novels. Um, Not everybody likes graphic novels, and yet the
Mhm.
adaptation was faithful. It was well done, and then it brought people that might not have consumed it into it, and now they get to experience it.
I think somebody might be like, "Well, there's all these
Mhm.
horrible adaptations. Why do people keep putting their
Yeah.
work out there to be adapted, to be frankly butchered? Why do people keep putting their books into the meat
Yeah.
grinder of Hollywood? And the fact of the matter is, even a modestly successful adaptation can be a
Mhm.
career maker for an author. The economics of
Mhm.
publishing books are horrible for authors. They're just atrocious for authors. Unless you get like a winning
Mhm.
lottery ticket as an author, you're not going to make money or very much money. You spend years potentially writing a book. You get an advance if you're like a first time or unsuccessful author of like $10,000, an advance, not, you know, and then you make pennies on the dollar
Yeah.
per sale. And if you sell a few thousand books, you're pretty
Mhm.
successful, right? It's not a great way to make money, but the ceiling is really high because if you manage, you sell, let's say you sell options for your book. You don't just sell the rights outright. You sell options for your book, right? And that means that like, somebody can exercise the option and make your show, right? So those don't go for very much unless your book is
Mhm.
really successful already. Um, but if your show, or sorry, if your book manages to be moderately successful, you manage to sell your book to some kind of production company who wants to pick up the options or whatever, and they decide they want to make it into a series, and then all this stuff happens, and it gets finally, amazingly, somehow gets made into a movie or a series. If your show or your movie is even
Yeah.
modestly successful, that can make your career because now you're talking about it reaching broader audiences of people who've never heard of your book or never read your book, you know. And so the ceiling, it puts the ceiling on the sort of the financial success of being an author. It puts that ceiling
Mhm.
into the stratosphere because if you can hit it big, not that everybody can be George R. R. Martin, right? And be a mega hit show, right? Not that everybody can do that, but if you can even be moderately successful, if you can even be Jonathan Strange
Mhm.
and Mr. Norrell successful, which was a Netflix show with one season that was a very good
Mhm.
adaptation of the source material. If you can even be that, your career can be made. And I don't know how much she made from all of this. I have no insider knowledge, but people hadn't heard of her book.
Yeah.
A lot of people hadn't heard of her book before that series. It was a popular Netflix show. Now people know who she is.
And I don't know if there's drawbacks to it because even if it's a bad adaptation, it's like
Oh, and I just really quick, sorry. I keep saying her, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell was written by Susanna Clark,
cool.
just
It's
for the
important to
record.
name.
So,
Yeah,
and
got to get
then
that
go
name out
ahead.
there. Well, again, that's the industry, and I can't fault authors for wanting to do it. It it horrifies me, like the idea of putting your soul out there and then having writers and producers do stuff with it. And it's a very
Mm-hmm.
brave thing. It's a very risky thing. I think like it bit Game of Thrones guy in the butt pretty hard. I think it made it harder to actually finish the real series. Um, and I think that's why it's such an interesting topic to talk about because if it works well, it's so awesome and it brings things alive and you can share this thing you love with millions of people. There's a tragedy side
Mhm.
to it though when it doesn't work. And I'd love to talk about Wheel of Time a little bit before we hop off because I have this interaction now when people go, "Oh yeah, Wheel of Time." I don't know, and I'd be like, "You got to read the books. It's completely. Please don't judge it based off of what you've seen." And
Yeah.
I feel like they say no bad press is still press. What's the phrase?
Isn't it, yeah, it's no
Yeah,
press is bad press, right? Like is the yeah, and no publicity is bad
and
publicity
I don't know if
because
I
of the
agree with that all the time because it,
yeah, no, certainly it's often true, but I think
yeah.
yeah, there are definitely exceptions.
Well, even you talked about author participation. Sanderson was a producer on that, and for those of you who don't know, Brandon Sanderson took over for the last three books after Robert Jordan passed away. And it's interesting too because you can hear interviews from Sanderson talking about the process where he'd have to fight for stuff, and these people, these whoever they were, would fight him on it. The guy who wrote the books and was entrusted with the private notes of Robert Jordan, and his wife Harriet is the one who kind of entrusts that to people. And Sanderson was it. Like they were like, "You're the only one we trust to finish this thing." And so Sanderson feels a lot of like responsibility for that. And he's been quite, he's said this a few times, but like, did you know, Gus, he had to fight to get the Horn of Valir and the heroes in there? They wanted to just cut it. They wanted to just,
I did not hear that specific thing. I've heard a lot about it, but
yeah,
that is
yeah, it's insane.
insane. Yeah. I mostly so I saw early on um yeah, he was talking about a lot of things he had to fight for and certain episodes that he was not
Hmm.
involved in at all. Like he was busy, he had other engagements, and he just simply wasn't involved in the writing. And honestly, all of the worst
Yeah,
episodes were
yeah.
ones he was not involved in. Like the
Mm-hmm.
last episode of the first season, which was a terrible episode. And I don't know if that's true for the second season, but I remember he was like, I didn't do this episode, I didn't do that episode. These things were sort of outside, like I wasn't involved in those.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to have, if it is possible, to have involvement, direct involvement of the author.
They're like, nah, we're gonna make Perrin
And
kill
so
his
yeah,
wife. Perrin
and
kills
they're
his
just going to
wife.
ignore that.
God.
Yeah. And the frustrating thing for me with Wheel of Time is it has had
Yeah.
some really cool moments. Like between I believe the showrunner wants to do right by it. I don't know that he always has done right by it. I think there are, changes that have been made that are not okay. That I don't know if it's Rafe.
I
Is
don't
Rafe,
remember.
what's his last name?
I've
Jed Judkins?
burned the name from my my memory. It's known as Rafe.
Yeah, I got it
Look
right.
at you.
It's Rafe Judkins.
Mm-hmm.
Look at me.
Piano.
So yeah, like Rafe. So Rafe Judkins, I believe he
Yeah.
means well with the show.
He talks a
I
big
believe he
talk.
mean like I think there he does, but I just think there's a lot. It's an Amazon show. I think there's a lot of sort of executives and people like
Focus
around
groups.
that show who are trying to change things just sort of for the sake of changing it or making it a way they think is will be more popular, play better with audiences or
What I
something. I don't know all the
well, yeah.
details about, like, obviously I'm not in the room. I don't know what's going on, but Rafe talks a good game. Brandon Sanderson is clearly made some episodes better by what he has done and fought for behind the scenes. The show has had
Yeah.
some cool moments. It has had some good episodes. It's like
Mm-hmm.
teetering. It's like Witcher. It's after the first
Mm-hmm.
season. It's teetering. They have changed some things. There are some problems with it. It is not in a perfect place, but some enough has been good that if they right the ship, if they fucking
Yeah.
listen to Brandon Sanderson a little bit more, involve him a little bit more. I don't know if he's even available to be involved a little bit more,
Yeah.
but if he's involved a little bit more, and it could be really good. I'm not ready to write Wheel of
Oh
Time
no.
off
Even me, I love to
completely.
hate it kind of. Like I'll still watch every episode and I'll complain through the whole thing, but I'll be there and I'll be watching it. Because those scenes where it does, it shines. The scenes where it doesn't though, and it goes back to fandom and things like that. I get the vibe from this game. It's like hearing like a brand new like CEO of a gaming company talk about how he's a gamer. I'm a gamer. I like games. There was that vibe. Like, Wheel of Time. What a great classic thing. But
Yeah.
Wheel of Time for me, I started reading when I was a teenager, like 11, 12, and it's a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
Um, and it's
Same.
gone, you read it every few years or so, and it's different every time you read it. You identify with different characters. It's near and dear to my heart. I probably have five reads, and I've listened to it also, which is great audiobooks.
Hmm.
And so, in addition to missing some of the basics of just a quality show, like script, cinematography, they have some serious
Hmm.
misses with that. They also have some hits. They have some stuff that works. I'm with you on the characterization. It's like it's fighting with itself sometimes. But in this last season, like so Sanderson fought for the Horn of Valir, which is a pretty big part of the books. It brings back all of the dead heroes
Hmm.
that and in the Wheel of Time, everybody is in this giant wheel of time. And when you die, the core of you is still in this wheel and you're reborn, you're flung out into the like you can be reborn and the heroes they can be summoned with this horn and it's people who do great deeds and things like that and sometimes they're enemies sometimes they're friends but when the horn calls they all come and so they don't really explain any of that in the book it's just this crappy little horn and then Matt gets up on the roof and there's like 20 Sanshin about to attack him they're like we're gonna get you and they're just standing there and he's like okay I'll blow the horn boop and all of these mighty heroes of the horn come back to to fight 20 Sanchin soldiers on a rooftop. Now in the books, they defeated an
Yeah.
army, and it was one of the best scenes in the books. There's mist, there's the children of the light advancing in a charge through the mist, and the heroes are around them. And I get chills thinking about reading that. And to see that scene that is one of
Yeah.
my favorite scenes, just reduced to 20 Sanchin dudes on a rooftop, it was it was a little soul crushing.
Yeah.
Like,
It
how
was
could you
kind of
replace that,
depressing,
man?
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Budget, probably. Like how
budget.
could they
That's
replace it?
maybe what it comes
Budget.
down to. There's a lot of stuff I guess we don't see that affects that, but
I think with Wheel of Time, I was
mm,
willing. I think as it goes, I'll be less willing to sort of give them slack, right? Because they know what they're getting in for, right? Like they hopefully they've read the book. Hopefully they know how big some of these scenes should be, and they get the right sense of scale for them, and they get the right budget for them because some of these scenes are going to be enormous, right? They have to be. And if they're not, then what the
yeah.
fuck are they even doing? Why bother? Right? It's Amazon. They should have the money. They should have known what they were getting
Hmm.
into when they signed up to do this show. Um, but I also understand why they changed a lot, especially in the first season. You've read the books a bunch of times, and I read them more than once. And after the show, I actually went back and read the first three books again after the first season. I gotta say, the first book, if you're trying to set up a show that's like this huge cast of characters that are all over the world and doing all these different things and you're trying to make them all a big deal from the beginning, like the book is basically the Rand and Matt show, right? And they're not even always doing exciting things. There's a big section of the book, I would say a third of the book is just Matt and Rand, or Rand and Matt, slowly traveling from
Yes.
town to town. In
Hmm.
every single town, they have basically the same encounter with like dark friends. And in the show, they did that in like one episode, right? They condense it all down. But now, because you want to introduce these other characters, you don't have source material for them, right? You have to kind of create things, and you have to kind of like fill in these gaps and fill it where in the books there's nothing, because you just follow these two characters and then skip a bunch of time for all the other characters. So like with the first season, I they had a real
Hmm.
problem, I would say, with trying to adapt that first novel. They had a real problem because they wanted to have all the big cast of all these characters, and they wanted to get people to know them, and they wanted to do all this stuff. And then in the
Yeah.
second book, it starts opening up more, and you start getting more of the other characters. And then even more so in the third book and the fourth book. And then the fourth book and beyond, it becomes this sprawling series with huge cast of
Yeah.
characters and like
Takes a
a
while
sort
to
of full
ramp up.
breadth. But
Yeah.
it takes a few books. It
Yeah.
takes a while to exactly. It
So
takes a
then you
while to
have to
get going.
adapt it. And yeah, I guess that's kind of the other part of our conversation. Like, I get it. It's difficult to adapt books to a screen.
It's a yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's a hard task. It's a hard
Yeah.
task. I just wish that more adapters of material and the people with the budget strings, I just wish they would be uh, a little more faithful to the source and even, or at
Yeah.
least the spirit of the source. And they'd try to change it less to, so that they're not trying to tell their own story. Because I think that's where a lot of these people get into trouble is they start trying to tell their own story. They start trying to tell the story they want to tell, as opposed to taking the story the author wanted to tell and transmitting that faithfully onto the screen, maybe in a completely adapted way, maybe in a wildly adapted way. I don't think a show like The Magicians is anything
Yeah.
like the books, really. I mean, it has similarities, especially in the early on, but then it's just a
Yeah.
wildly different show. Just as to name one example, and it's a good show, right? It is. I mean, it has its moments. It's a pretty good show. Is it the most faithful adaptation? No, but they basically were trying to tell the story the author was trying to tell, basically, for the most part. Until the later seasons, it kind of went on its own direction because it moved
Yeah.
past the books. But
And,
that's a whole
maybe
different thing.
we've hit on just the core of this. Like, there are some people, like I think Denis Villeneuve of Dune
Mhm.
comes across to me like a person who he's got the vision, the time, and he's got a sense of freedom to do that and create. And I think even well-meaning people who are beholden to maybe shareholders or budgetary strings and producers and people
Mhm.
who have, you know, there's merchandising. They gotta like, and they but that's how they do things. They do focus groups. They wanna nail it down, and they've turned an art form into we're looking for a bracket for 24 to 35-year-olds in this demographic. Like, and I think you're going to lose something if you go that route. And that's kind of the reality we're in a lot of ways. And when I talked about Earthsea and the 80s, they were kind of a lot of a lot of those were kind of there's like a lot of commercialism in those. Like, I remember the Care Bear movie was just a commercial. They just wanted to sell Care Bears.
Yeah, I want to, an example of one that I think that better than Care Bears for our discussion is
Oh yeah.
Conan the Barbarian. The first
So good.
movie is actually really good. I mean, it's like
Hmm.
genuinely it's a great sword and sorcery fantasy movie. It's bloody, it's sexy, it tells a good story. I mean, it's a little like low budget in
Yeah.
places because it was the 80s, right? And it
79,
was
I
like,
think, for the first one.
but
So
it's a
yeah.
great, was it, was it 79? I thought it was like 80, 81, something like that. But either way, the first one was really good. And even if it was like a totally original story, because it's not like some of the characters were, you know, from the books, right? But it was like it was its own
Yeah.
story, really. I mean, like they very loosely adapted some of the short stories and mashed them together, right? But the point is that this first movie was rated
Mm.
R, right? It was done really well. It was done fairly faithfully, at least to the spirit of the books, which is very lurid, sort of pulpy, old school fantasy, the sort of origins of what we call fantasy. I mean, Conan is like goes back to the
Yeah.
beginning of modern fantasy. It's like before The
Yeah.
Hobbit, before Tolkien, before all that stuff. I mean, it was sort of a it wasn't the first fantasy. Obviously, the first fantasy goes back much further and it was like fairy tales and stuff. But in terms of being what we would consider modern fantasy, right? Robert E. Howard is one of the first, and it's this very violent, pulpy stuff. A lot of sex, a lot of violence. The first movie, Conan the Barbarian movie, was very faithful in that way and in the sort of spirit of it. And he's just sort of this big barbarian guy running around the ancient world smashing things
So
and
great.
destroying them and hitting them
Yeah.
with swords and it's fantastic. And then the producers got it in their heads that like we
Yeah.
can make money off of this. This is popular. And so the next movie was like PG
Get that
and
broader
like they were
audience in
trying to
there.
make it so that
Yeah, more
anybody could
accessible.
broader audience, anybody, and it's toned down and it's awful. And they made
Yeah.
Red Sonja. Eventually they made like
Kroll the
it's
Conqueror.
called The Conqueror with Kevin
Yeah.
Sorbo, and like these movies were
Oh,
terrible. Like all
they're
the
like
ones after that in like the 80s
they're
and
like
90s, just
awesomely terrible though.
horrifically
I'll go
bad.
back and watch some of that. But
I
hey, Conan 2,
disagree.
man, we
I
watched that
disagree
a million
about.
times.
Oh no, Conan 1 is great. I will watch Conan 1 anytime.
I'll
The other
rewatch it
ones
again
terrible.
with my
They're
critical eye. But
yeah. I actually watched
oh,
Crystal
okay.
had never seen Conan, the first one. She'd seen the second one because like her dad would watch that on
Uh,
like Saturday mornings or whatever. She'd seen the second one. She'd never seen the first one. And so we're watching this and she's like, "Whoa. This is this is crazy." Because she had no
yeah,
idea, right? That we're
that's awesome.
anyway.
Yeah, seeing the first. I don't think I've watched Conan with Katie. I need to make that happen.
So yeah, man, I think there are about a million shows and movies adaptations that we could talk about because there are so many that are out there. There are so many that I had on my list that I haven't talked about. Stardust, Narnia, His Dark Materials, The Foundation, which is terrible.
Oh, I
The
like
books are
this.
great. The show is terrible. Oh god,
Well, I haven't
we
read the
could
books
yeah we
though.
can argue about
I haven't read the
that.
books.
uh,
Uh,
I read the books. I love the books. The books are anyway. The Expanse show is amazing,
yeah.
and so
God,
on and so
Stephen
forth.
King,
And we could
man.
just
I was
keep
thinking
going.
Stephen
We
King. We
could
could
keep
talk
going
about
with
all night. I think,
oh yeah,
yeah.
and the Dark Tower was so bad. Yeah, for example. And
There's
I
so
mean,
many.
there's so many to talk about, but we
Yeah,
can't. We don't have all night,
we don't. This was a great
unfortunately.
subject, though.
Uh,
Yeah,
both of us got
it's
to
a great
go.
subject. I feel like
Yeah, we might have to have a
we
part
might need to.
two
Yeah, there's more there.
someday.
I feel the energy. There's more there. I mean, Dresden Files came up
Yeah.
too. There was a great like,
Oh
yeah, they're so
God, I
good.
love those books, and I hate that show.
But yeah, possibilities are endless. Well, let's make it happen, man. We gotta, yeah, we'll do our vacations and then go from there.
Yeah. This episode is going to take
Yeah,
forever
turn
to
from
edit. I'm just
a
saying.
short edit to a long edit. But I think it was worth it, man. It was a great
Yeah.
discussion. Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. It's been fun. I think this topic was really fun to talk about. I think it was
Yeah, it
for
was.
you
And
too.
I hope it was for the listeners. And
Yeah.
if you like what you hear, share it with a friend. If you like hearing our sultry voices in your ears or in your car, there's more. So
Yeah.
I gotta work on my delivery, Gus.
Like it.
Oh yeah, like and
Like and
subscribe.
subscribe. I'll just get in here close. Like
Yeah,
and subscribe.
little Carl reference and maybe help the
Yeah.
the
Some
ASMR
heavy
folks
breathing.
maybe.
Some heavy
But
breathing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks for the
Yeah. I
conversation, guys.
mean, I'm gonna do the
Oh
stay
yeah,
gold thing
stay
again.
gold. Yeah, we do.
But seriously, we need to work on that.
All right,
All right. That'll just be what we
sounds
worked
good.
on. That'll just be what it is now.
All right, later, man.